A lot of people everywhere are stuck in spiritual paralysis because they're trying to perfect everything before they step into what God's calling them into. You spend months polishing your plan, perfecting your skills, and waiting for the perfect moment to move forward. But here's what's actually happening. While you're obsessing over having everything flawless, opportunities are passing you by, people who need your gifts are waiting, and you're burning out from trying to control the outcomes that were never yours to control in the first place. You're so focused on creating the perfect environment that you're missing God's presence in the imperfect process. What if I told you that the very thing that you're trying to perfect is actually keeping you from being positioned for God's purpose? In today's video, I'm going to break down 3 biblical truths that will shift you from perfectionism to preparation and show you how to operate in grace instead of control. First, let me tell you about 2 sisters who perfectly illustrate the difference between perfectionism and preparation. Their story will completely change how you approach serving God. So picture this. Jesus is coming to dinner at your house. How would you respond? Because when Jesus visited Mary and Martha at their home, both their responses were completely different. Martha immediately went into perfectionist mode. She was distracted by all the preparations. She was running around trying to create the perfect environment, the perfect meal, the perfect experience for Jesus. Meanwhile, Mary sat at Jesus' feet listening to his teachings. And when Martha complained about Mary not helping her, Jesus said something that seemed backwards. Martha, Martha, you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better. So Jesus revealed that Martha's problem wasn't that she was preparing, it was that she was anxiously striving for perfection instead of positioning herself for his presence. Perfection is a realm reserved only for God. Preparation, however, is our responsibility. That is the first truth that will free us from the perfectionist trap. Martha wasn't condemned for preparing. She was corrected for anxious striving. There was a massive difference between preparation and perfectionism. Preparation without peace becomes perfectionism. Service without surrender becomes striving. Doing without being becomes dysfunction. And what a lot of people don't realize is that perfectionism actually decreases performance and increases anxiety. It's a control-seeking behavior that masquerades as preparation, but it's really about trying to control the outcomes that actually belong to God. When Jesus said, "Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect," in Matthew 5, verse 48, he used the Greek word teleos, which means complete or mature, not flawless performance. God's perfection is about wholeness and love, not sinless execution. You're not called to be perfect. You're called to be positioned. Here's what's really happening when you chase perfection instead of pursuing preparation. You're actually limiting God's ability to work through you in a way that most people don't realize. Let me show you God's approach to preparation versus approach to perfection by looking at 3 biblical examples. When God needed someone to build an ark, he didn't choose the world's most skilled shipbuilder. He chose Noah, who prepared the ark according to God's specification, not his own perfectionist standards. When God needed someone to prepare Egypt for famine, he didn't choose the most experienced economist. He chose Joseph, who prepared through divine wisdom, not human perfection. When God needed someone to rebuild Jerusalem's walls, he didn't choose the most qualified construction manager. He chose Nehemiah, who prepared through prayer and planning, not perfect execution. The pattern is clear. God values preparation over perfection. He wants readiness, not flawlessness. Each of these men prepared diligently while trusting completely. You cannot operate in grace while obsessed with control. Grace and control are fundamentally incompatible. Here's the key distinctions. Preparation is about positioning. Perfection is about performance. Readiness reduces anxiety by creating. Readiness without demanding perfection. Preparation reduces anxiety by creating. Readiness without demanding perfection. Excellence focuses on process and growth, while perfectionism focuses on outcome and control. 2 Corinthians 12 verse 9 says, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in your weakness," or in weakness. Notice that God's power is made perfect in our weakness, not our strength. When we try to be perfect, we actually limit God's ability to work through us. And the paradox is this: perfectionism reveals a grace deficit, an inability to receive and operate in God's unmerited favor. We're trying to earn what God has already given us. But when we prepare diligently while trusting completely, plan thoroughly while holding loosely, and work excellently while resting securely, we operate in the sweet spot of grace. But here's the most liberating truth about breaking free from perfectionism, and it's the key to stepping into the prepared life that God has designed for you. Before we get to that, let me tell you about the moment that changed everything for the Apostle Paul. He was a perfectionist, educated, accomplished. He was zealous. He was on fire. He was meticulous. And he was a killer, literally and figuratively. But after his encounter with Jesus, Paul had to learn a completely new way of operating. In 2 Corinthians 12, he talks about struggling with a thorn in the flesh, something that made him feel imperfect and inadequate. 3 times he begged God to remove it, essentially saying, "God, I can't serve you perfectly with this weakness." But God's response was revolutionary. "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." So Paul discovered that God doesn't want our perfect performance. He wants our positioned heart. Paul learned to say, "When I am weak, then I am strong," because he understood that God's strength is perfect in our weakness, not our strength. The trap of perfectionism versus the wisdom of preparation. This is the third truth that will activate your prepared life. Paul discovered that preparation involves surrender to God's grace, not control outcomes. And here's the practical difference. Perfectionism says, "I must be perfect." Preparation says, "God in me is perfect." Perfectionism says, "I must control the outcomes." Preparation says, "I trust God with the results." Perfectionism says, "Mistakes define me." Preparation says, "Grace redefines me." The prepared life has 3 characteristics. Number 1, spiritual readiness, which means staying connected to God's presence. Number 2, practical wisdom, planning diligently without demanding perfection. Number 3, rational availability, which means your readiness to serve others from a place of rest and not stress. When you stop trying to be perfect and start preparing to be positioned, you discover peace in the process rather than anxiety about the outcomes, power through surrender rather than exhaustion through control, and purpose through identity rather than performance. And what I love about letting go of perfectionism is that it frees you from the pressure of being flawless while still calling you to show up prepared. That's powerful. But here's what I've noticed. A lot of people finally embrace grace over perfection and then get stuck in this weird middle zone. They're not striving anymore, but they're not building either. They're just surviving, waiting, hoping life sorts itself out. And I get it. After years of survival mode, just breathing can feel like progress. But at some point, we have to ask, am I still surviving what God already delivered me from? The Israelites were out of Egypt, but Egypt was still living in their mindset. Maybe that's where you are right now. So how do you know it's time to stop surviving and to start building? And that's what we're talking about in the next video.